sometimes you grow up in trauma and you won't even realize that you've been traumatized. You don't even realize to the point in which you've literally been affected. Hey guys, welcome to Triumph Over Trauma. My name is Miss E. Listen, I created this channel in conjunction with my podcast, Triumph Over Trauma. I'm hoping my level of transparency will help you identify, navigate, and recover from traumatic experiences. Let's get into it. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Triumph Over Trauma. Listen, this weekend I watched the Netflix series Killer Sally, and generally anything with the word killer in the title, that would have been something I skipped over. I don't really like gory movies or scary movies or anything with violence or anything like that. Partially because I'm pretty sensitive, and those type of things will like stay in my mind. I'll dream about it. And also because of some of the things I've experienced, I don't really like to be reminded of it. I guess that's part of the PTSD that I have. So anyway, I'm scrolling through the selections on Netflix. And you know, if you stay on one selection for too long, it'll start to play a little bit of the clip. So I got distracted and my cursor stayed on the selection for too long, and it started to play the clip while I was talking to my daughters. Out giving too much of the story away. Basically, it's a documentary about a female bodybuilder is accused of murdering her husband. So I wound up watching the whole movie, obviously, and or the whole series, and it basically details this woman's life from childhood to adulthood. I mean, there were so many similarities to my own life and some of the things that I had experienced. I was literally hooked with this show. One of the things that I thought was very interesting is that this woman's trauma and abuse started at childhood. She experienced abandonment, rejection, physical and verbal abuse at an early age. And I could not help but notice the similarities in Sally's life to mine. She was a child when abuse and trauma first entered her life. She had been verbally, physically, mentally abused. She had gone through abandonment and rejection, and faced all sort of types of trauma at a very early age. And she was diagnosed with PTSD and battered woman syndrome. There's a few things I want to point out in regards to this movie. First of all, these are real life things. This was a true story, and these events took place in this woman's life, and the amount of abuse that she endured was devastating to her psyche, to her self-esteem, to her emotional and mental health. And sometimes I feel as though our society has a tendency to villainize the victim. You know, it's almost as if we are blaming people. Sometimes we blame people for the decisions and choices that they make. You know, why did you stay? Why did you tolerate it for so long? Why didn't you get help? You know, why didn't you do this? And it's almost as if we are placing blame on victims rather than holding their abusers responsible. One of my first thoughts was the fact that this type of abuse was introduced to her at an early age. She had been married twice, and by the time she had entered into her second abusive marriage, pretty much assumed that abuse and toxicity in relationships were normal. All because this is what she had learned early in her childhood. Her biological father abandoned her. Her stepfather, he did also physically abuse her to the point where would coach her on how to hide the bruises. You know, wear longer dresses so that no one can see that your legs have been bruised. And so this went on throughout her life, obviously affecting her self-esteem, her sense of self-worth, and what I believe was her tolerance level for abuse, because she actually had two abusive marriages. Both of the marriages that she had been in were toxic and abusive. I strongly believe that because she encountered such abuse as a child, that, like she attested to in the movie, that it was normal for her. It was something that she had grown to accept. And when I look back at my own life and make correlations between myself and Sally's story, I can see instances where I accepted less than what I deserved in certain relationships, all because these were things that I had seen my own mother go through, my own grandmother go through, and I thought it was normal. I thought it was something that you just had to go through as a woman. And to me, it goes to show that you can be so conditioned by what you experience early on in your life that it will factor some of the choices and decisions that you make in adulthood. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about identifying, navigating, and recovering from traumatic experience. First, identifying, where did this start? Where did this begin for me? And obviously for me, it began in my childhood. And for a lot of people, it begins in their childhood. Not only did what she went through affect her, it affected her choices, it affected her decision making, it affected her thought processes, it affected her reasoning skills, it affected her ability to understand what she was even experiencing. There were some times in the movie where she speaks to not even being able to come to terms with what she was actually going through. She was pretty much in denial as to what she was experiencing. And the other important thing that I noticed is that both of her children, she had children by her husband in her first marriage, both of her children were also affected by the abuse and the trauma that she experienced. Her daughter actually also testified to having PTSD and having been in her own abusive relationship before leaving. The son also admits to having had PTSD, also having had difficulty in his marriage, in addition to having challenges with alcohol and substance abuse. For me, it was very familiar because, again, a lot of the things that she experienced, I experienced. And a lot of the ways it affected her children was some of the ways that my mother's decisions affected our family. My father was abusive as well, and was abusive to my mother and abusive to my siblings as well. And so those are the types of things that we are taking in as children, and we never really know how these things are shaping us. We never really know or understand to what degree these things are influencing us until we are adults and we are faced with decisions as to whether or not we should tolerate abuse or trauma or toxicity or any level of treatment less than what we deserve. For me, there was a point in time when I was in a relationship that was a bit toxic, and although I wasn't being abused per se, there was some level of dysfunction. There was some level of mistreatment. And before I decided to leave the relationship, I remember being able to make a correlation between what I had experienced and what I saw my mother and grandmother experience. And for a split second, I accepted it as having been normal. And I almost stayed because of that. And so it's just so surprising to me to see how what you experience as a child stays with you. Although those memories, those feelings, those experiences may have been dormant, when I was faced with those same experiences, all of those things came back to me. And they influenced me in some ways positively, in some ways negatively. I don't think that we as a society pay as much attention to these types of stories as we need to. I don't think that people really understand the science behind trauma and abuse. I don't believe that we, as far as we have come with mental health awareness, trauma and abuse and things like that, I still don't feel like we have come as far as we need to with accepting the reality of how these things affect us. I believe in a lot of ways Sally was treated more as a villain rather than a victim. I believe that there should have been a twofold reckoning. I feel like the emphasis with making her come to terms with what she had done should also have been accompanied by the assistance of rehabilitation, because for Sally, this trauma and abuse started at childhood, and she had pretty much lived a life of abuse, of trauma, of violence. I'm not saying that the things that happened weren't worthy of reprimand, but I believe that there is more that could have been done to rehabilitate her mentally and emotionally, other than just making her accountable legally for or lawfully for what happened. And so I say all that to say that I think it's living proof that we live in a society, again, that often misunderstands the plight of those that have been abused and those that have been mistreated and those that have experienced these levels of trauma, and the ways in which these types of incidences affect us. And I think Sally's story is living proof of that, not only because of the decisions and choices that she made as a result of what she had experienced, but also the way in which she was treated because of those decisions. Because of stories like Sally's, because of stories like Sally's children, because of stories like mine, this is the reason why this podcast was even established. I am looking to create a space for people who have similar stories, who have similar struggles, is because it's real. This is real. This is everyday life for some people. And people are gravely affected by trauma and abuse every day. It made me look at my own life. It made me, connect. It made me reflect on the ways in which I have responded to the trauma that I've experienced, the ways in which I've been affected by the abuse that I've experienced, and how I'm working hard to make sure that those things are not passed down to my own children, right? To make sure that I am not regenerating cycles of trauma and abuse, so that my children understand that at any time, if you feel as though you're being treated wrongly, unfairly, unjustly, or less than what you deserve, that you have options. And no matter what, where you are, who you're with, and also no matter what you've even seen in generations before you, you don't have to repeat those same cycles. You don't have to stay in those same types of relationships and deal with the things that you've seen others deal with. You don't have to do it. Again, I think that these are the types of stories that we should be telling, and I'm grateful to Netflix for bringing such awareness to these types of events, because if you look at it through the lens and trying to understand how childhood trauma and abuse affected this woman's decisions throughout her entire life, perhaps that can give us an inclination in how to help stop regenerating these cycles. The daughter said that not only did she develop PTSD because of the things that she experienced, but she also at one point in time was in an abusive relationship herself. You know what I mean? She did go on to say that she left the abusive relationship. What if she hadn't? What if she hadn't made it out? What if, God forbid, history had repeated herself with the way in which her mother dealt with her abuser, right? I feel like there were so many call to actions in this particular series. There was a call to awareness of childhood trauma and abuse. There was a call to the need for education regarding battered women syndrome, domestic violence, the need for I feel like they need to beef up the support services that we are offering people who have been abused or who have gone through domestic violence. We're just leaving out of October, which was Domestic Violence Month, and I sat in on a symposium last month, and the panel consisted of some police detectives, family court officials. I believe there was a mental health counselor there. There was a domestic violence advocate, and they began to discuss the steps that you would need to take in order to obtain protective services if you're being, abused. And so each of them spoke to the reality of the fact that domestic violence is something that we're still very much dealing with, obviously, on a greater scale than we should be. No one should be being abused. And no one should be made to feel like they have to stay in abusive situations. But one of the things that was spoken about in the symposium was that if a person is being physically abused and is being threatened, or life is being threatened, that it is more likely that they will receive a positive response in obtaining protection from that type of abuse rather than a person who says he is or she is verbally abusing me. And I thought, well, that's odd because a lot of abuse starts with, or a lot of domestic violence abuse starts with verbal abuse. There's all sorts of abuse. There's financial abuse. There's sexual abuse. There is, again, verbal and mental abuse, psychological abuse, right? And I thought it was strange that the narrative almost, I thought it was strange that the narrative seemed to say that if you're not being subjected to abuse that is not physical, that you are less likely to receive help. And I'm like, wow, well, that needs to change because clearly verbal, financial, sexual abuse, all of these can have an effect on a person and be damaging. And I really don't think that we as a society, as lawmakers, as advocates, as mental health professionals, as physicians, I don't think that we, if we do realize the detriment that trauma and abuse plays in people's lives, if we do realize that, I don't feel like we're doing enough to make sure that these types of people are supported and to make sure that we have an understanding of how it affects people. You just never know. One of the women who at the symposium, actually, she was not on a panel, but she rose up to speak to some of the things that she had been through. And she said that she is a woman in law enforcement. And she said that the person she was in a relationship with was also a member of law enforcement. And because of his position, he was able to downplay the incidences that she had been reporting regarding his abuse and treatment of her. So much to the point where she also developed mental health challenges, anxiety and depression and PTSD. For that whole entire family, Sally and her children, all of them to say that they suffered from PTSD was heart-wrenching to me, especially as one who suffers from PTSD. And I just feel like there's not enough emphasis and research in regard given to illnesses that we can't readily see. I feel like that speaks to the fact that we are a society, unfortunately, who has to see it to believe it. If I don't see specifically the way in which this abuse has harmed you, then I, in the seat of government or the powers of government or legislation or wherever I sit, have the ability to say that you don't necessarily need my help because you are not physically being abused or assaulted. And I that just doesn't sit right with me. That just does not sit right with me. Also, I don't know specifically if this was an option that was provided to Sally's children when they were relocated to her mother's care. I'm trying not to give so much of the story away. You really need to watch it. But I also feel like it is important for any time. I feel like in any capacity, any time a child, an adult, anytime that there is a report of abuse or domestic violence, not only do the social services need to, relocate, or not only does the police need to get involved, I feel like the children should have been, and the children and the adults need to be offered supportive services in the way of mental health treatment, in the way of trauma and grief counseling. Not only did they witness their mother being abused, but they were also abused, right? And I feel like there should have been more should have been done to rehabilitate them so that they did not go on to regenerate these traumas in their own life. I can't help but think about the fact that the daughter said she too entered into an abusive relationship at one point, and that the son also said that at one point he was in a negative relationship with his spouse. because it's so necessary. If you want to stop generational trauma, you have to educate people regarding it. If you want to prevent regeneration of cycles and of abuse, then you have to spread awareness. You have to make it known and make it obvious that these things are not only are they happening, but they are affecting generations, right? We are spreading awareness regarding trauma, regarding childhood trauma, regarding domestic violence, regarding abuse, so that people understand that there is somewhere that they can go to receive support. Effects of trauma and abuse are real. This is happening every day for some people, and these people belong to our churches. These people go to school with us. These people work with us. These are everyday people. It's not just the poor, it's not just the rich, it's not just the black, it's not just the white, it's the society as a whole. There are victims experiencing these types of trauma and abuses, and nobody is speaking to them. We hear these stories, you know, and we're like, oh man, that's a shame. And for a moment, our hearts are pricked. Feel badly for these people, but does it motivate us to do something about it? Does it motivate us to spread awareness and to advocate for these victims? When I think about Sally's story, I got the sense that she was made out to be a villain. She was made out to be the aggressor. She was made out to be the angry, housewife. And in some capacity, she was very angry. In some capacity, she was aggressive, and in some capacity, she was violent. These character flaws, if you will, spoke to what happened to her that caused her to feel and act and react the way in which she did. And I don't feel like that is spoken to enough. I don't feel like that we are doing a good job as a society to understand that, to understand the way in which trauma and abuse affects the psyche, the mind, the emotions, the heart, the body, the soul of a person. I don't think we're doing enough to understand that. I think that we are quick to judge. I think we are quick to assume. I think what we don't understand, we don't care to understand. I don't think that we want to understand. I think we want to be able to quickly pass judgment so that we don't have to identify ways in which someone else's story could speak to us, right? Because but for the grace of God, there go I. And in my case, but for the grace of God, there was I. And in some capacity, still am. Again, there's more that needs to be done. There's more than that. There's more that needs to be said. There are more spaces that need to be created. There are more support services that need to be offered. There's so much more work to be done. If you know anybody who has experienced trauma or abuse, I urge you to seek help. I know that it is difficult to pull yourself out of the pain and the trauma and the devastation. I totally understand and I totally agree. But you are worth the rehabilitation. You are worth the support. You are worth the help and the restoration that you deserve. It's unfortunate that it seems as if we live in a society in which, after having been fought, you've been fought all your life by trauma and abuse, that you then have to turn around and fight for your life, fight for your peace, and fight for your recovery. But the truth of the matter is, you are worth the fight. And whatever it takes for you to be able to be restored and to fully recover from all that you have experienced, you need to do it. You have to do it. Take it from me. I am not saying that it's easy. I am not going to pretend that every day is a good, sunny, joyful day. Some days are worse than others. And some days, the weight of the reality of how these things have affected me, sometimes it holds me back. Sometimes it makes me want to not crawl out of bed, but I must go on. I have to go on. I have to keep going. And I'm doing this for people like Sally, for people like Sally's children, for people like myself, from people who come from backgrounds like mine, and from people who don't. Because we need help. We need more resources. We need more support. We need more attention. There needs to be more attention surrounding it. When I think about the ways that trauma and abuse has affected me and my family, Trauma and abuse literally at one point literally destroyed my family. It took my mother and father. I have an older brother who passed away as a result of violence as well. What we don't understand is that it's destroying us. It's destroying our homes. It's destroying our family. It's destroying our communities. It's destroying our sense of self. Sometimes it's easier to ignore if it's out of sight, not out of mind. If you're not directly affected by it, but I want to challenge you in changing that narrative, because you are directly affected by it, whether you witness abuse, whether you're a victim of abuse, or whether you know someone who has, because these people who, again, have either witnessed abuse, been a victim of abuse, or are abusers, these people are members of our society. You know what I mean? And so I think there just needs to be more emphasis and insight, more attention given to these types of stories, and not just attention, but more effort into understanding how they affect us. We need to understand how they affect us. Because again, in Sally's story, I can't help but sit with the fact that this was literally generations and generations of trauma and abuse. Sally's mother was abused. She spoke to the fact that while her mother was 8 months pregnant with her, her father kicked her mother in the belly, right? And then Sally went on to be abused in her childhood. And then she also went on to be abused within her marriages. And then her children also went on to be abused because of the abuse, by the husband. And then the children also went on to be in abusive relationships. And so you can clearly see that it's like this is a systemic issue, because it's a family history of trauma and abuse. And I think we as a society are so quick to rush to the person that is exhibiting these behaviors or violent tendencies, rages, issues, not realizing that this stems from somewhere. In fact, there's traumas that children can experience while in the womb, right? And then once you are born into an environment that are not conducive, that are toxic, that are dysfunctional, that lack affirmation, love, and support, are abusive, all of these things have an effect on a child's psyche and upbringing and decision making. And I think we are judging people based on the decisions that they are making or not making, not realizing that a decision was made for them a long time ago. These decisions they had no part in. Some of these decisions they were without participation because they were children. You love and need your mother and father, but your caregivers are responsible for the pain that you are experiencing. And again, I think I can only relate her story back to mine, because, that is exactly what happened to me. And so I have begun working on ways in which I make sure that this doesn't happen, that this does not continue in my family. Right? I am telling my truths. I am being transparent. I am speaking to the reality of the effects that these things have on us. I am exposing trauma and abuse for the evil that it does. Although some of the memories that I sit with, some of the memories and the emotions that come up with having to recall some of these things are very painful and distressful. Some of them will result in a call to my therapist. Some of them will result in a need for more prayer and time alone with God. But it's necessary in order to spread awareness and in order to help someone else. So I think we have some takeaways. I think we have some homework to do. I think we have some call to actions. I think, again, we need to understand. We need to take a look at our own lives and see, has there been any instances in my life where I have either been a victim or a witness to abuse and I didn't realize it? Is there any instances in my life where I have been made to repress or suppress things and I don't realize that they could be affecting me to this day? They could be affecting the way that I parent my own children. They could be affecting the choices and the decisions that I'm making regarding relationships that I'm in. and people that I'm with. So I feel like there's so much to be done. I feel like we need to take a self-evaluation. Where am I in my life? And is where I am as a result of trauma, of abuse, of dysfunction, of toxicity? And if it is, what can I do to ensure that I don't regenerate these cycles within my life or within the lives of my children? Right? What can I do to ensure that I am restored and I am recovered from all of that I have experienced that is negative? Because the reality of it is, life can sometimes be painful, and there are things that we experience that will jolt us. But it's a whole nother thing to experience something that changes the very fabric of your mental and emotional balance. And that's what trauma and abuse does. It changes the fabric of balance that you were born with, right? Because you're born and created in the image of God and the likeness of God, and you're born and created to love and to live and to be loved. One of the things that the Bible puts the most emphasis on is the love of your neighbor and yourself. And how can you love your neighbor or yourself if you have never been properly loved? How can you learn not to abuse if you have only been abused? Or how can you stop reflecting these abusive or negative behaviors if you don't understand them? Because not only was Sally affected by what she had gone through, even her husband, he spoke to the fact that he had experienced levels of abuse and trauma in his childhood. And so here you have a woman who comes from trauma and abuse that she experienced in her childhood, who hooked up or got with a man who was also abused and mistreated in his childhood. And so here you have these two people with these painful backgrounds coming together without having ever been able to face it or to confront it or to recover. But unfortunately, those wounds that she was carrying, maybe unbeknownst to her, she was looking to have healed. She was looking to have filled. She was looking for love. Because all of us are, because that's what we were created for, to love and to be loved. For God even so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son for us. And one of his greatest commandments is love, right? And so it's not a bad thing, that we are in need of love and looking for love. It is unfortunate that so many of us don't know how to love, because so many of us were not properly loved. So many of us have experienced abusive love and controlling and manipulative love. And if you know anything about love, that's not love at all. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not selfish. Love is not arrogant. Love is not boastful. Love is not envious. Love gives all and supports all. And unfortunately, we still have much work to do as a society to understand and to be able to support each other in love, regardless of our backgrounds, regardless of our stories, especially in light of the pain that so many of us has experienced. I'm a woman of faith, and I always say that the only thing that is constant in my life is God. That is the only thing that I have ever been able to wholeheartedly rely on, regardless of what has happened in my life. And so it is to him that I belong and in him that I trust. And so I want to say a prayer. I want to pray for you. I want to pray for Sally's family. I want to pray for anyone whose story is similar to mine or Sally. I want to say that regardless of all that you have experienced, that God loves you. You are valuable. You have worth. You have worth that is beyond limit. And regardless of what you have experienced, regardless of how you may have been treated, it is not an estimation of your worth. It is not an estimation of your value. In fact, you are priceless, because you were bought with a price that no one else can pay. And that is with the love and the life of Jesus. So I'm praying that if you have experienced trauma or abuse in any capacity, whether you were a witness or a participant or a victim, I pray for your total healing, restoration, and recovery. I pray that it gets easier for you to understand, to confront, and to deal with. I pray that everything that was taken away from you, whether it be your value, your sense of worth, your own stability, health, or strength, I pray that it is restored. I pray that you come to know and to understand the love of God. I pray that you come to be strengthened in who you are and who you are meant to be. I pray for your peace and I pray for your joy. I pray for anything that you stand in need of today. I pray that it would be provisioned unto you. I pray that it would be provided. I pray that if you need support or help in any capacity, that you would seek it. I pray that you would develop healthy coping mechanisms. I pray for your restoration. I pray for your strength. I pray for everything you need to be able to recover for whatever it is that you have experienced. And I pray that you know that it's not too late. I pray that you would value yourself in your life, regardless of what you've experienced and regardless of what the trauma and abuse may have made you believe. I'm sorry for what you had to experience. I'm sorry for the pain that you've had to endure. I'm sorry for the trauma and abuse. I'm sorry for how it made you feel. I'm sorry for the way it has affected you. I'm sorry for how your mind was affected. I'm sorry for how your peace was disrupted. I'm sorry for the way your heart was broken. And although those negative things did happen, it is my prayer that you are restored. It is my prayer that you are helped. It is my prayer that you are loved beyond that which you've ever been. It is my prayer that you come to enjoy life and all that it has to offer you because you deserve it. But if you have any questions or comments about this episode, please by all means reach out to me. You can reach out to me via email, that's triumphtrauma@gmail.com, or if you're watching on YouTube, of course, you can rate, comment, and subscribe. DM me, message me, however you'd like to connect with me. I am Miss Eve on all of my socials, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Also, if you're a woman in need of some retail therapy, I have an online boutique called Studio E Boutique. All of my Triumph Over Trauma listeners will receive a 10% discount when you use the code TRIUMPH at checkout. Again, thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a great day. And remember, thanks unto God who always causes us to triumph.